we call it a life after business. What are you going to do the day after closing? You know, because to your point, you can only play so much golf. You can only travel so much. But figuring out what it is you're going to do. And I tell owners, look, we're not talking about a day planner for the rest of your freaking life. We're talking about a general direction here. You say you want to retire. Well, what does that mean? What does retiring mean to you? And, some business owners have rather, modest expectations, and they say, well, I don't need to work on my business much. I think I have enough. And, and I always tell them, your business is worth, potentially, you know, twice what you say you need. That doesn't mean you just stop now, because you now have an opportunity to get into some philanthropic work. When we were in Kansas, every county had a foundation, and they were always broke, right? So I would tell owners, look, why don't you take $500,000 and leave it to this foundation? Why don't you take another $750,000 and give it here? Do something good. And that registered with them. That really registered with them. So it's not just, you know, are you going to the beach and sip umbrella drinks, or are you going to start a business? Those things are very possible. And I think the younger you exit, the more you tend to think of really some type of interim step, before you really close up shop. But knowing what it is you want to do in that next phase of your life, because you're going to have 8 to 12 hours a day that ain't full,
Yeah.
and
Well, and this goes back to kind of that gap you're talking about. So if a blind conversation happened, I didn't know the age of the owner, any of that stuff, and they said, "How much does my business need to sell for me to be able to retire comfortably?" And I didn't know anything else about them. I would say, well, between 5 to 6 on the low end and maybe 15 to 17 on the high end. Now that's if you're in New York City versus the rural area, like there's a lot of variables in that, and obviously it can be less than that. That's true. To be higher than that, you really got to be living on the extreme. Like you really got to be living on the extreme. But that's kind of a safe range, I think. And most owners hear that, or they might hear that and go, "Oh, my business is worth $5 million," and that seems to become the problem. It's not. It's like, oh, it's not worth that 5 6 million dollars that you need. That's kind of my thoughts on that. Am I right, wrong? You disagree? Go ahead. If you do, feel free to push back. It's okay.
yeah. Well, uh, I mean, everybody wants to know what it's worth. What's my business worth? Well, a business is only worth what a buyer and seller agree that it's worth, right? So, you can play the kind of blind squirrel approach and throw a number out, see if you get any takers. If you get a lot of takers, you underbid the market there. But I I don't spend a lot of time talking to them about what it's worth until they, finish the valuation and the assessment, and then we sit down and we have a little workshop presentation on here's what I'm seeing. And we talked about your life after business and what it is you want to do. And I had one guy that wanted to travel to and watch at least one game at every major league baseball stadium. So he's like, well, a couple 100,000 ought to do it. And I gave him a homework assignment. I said, okay, this weekend I want you to sit down and take the first 10 stadiums you want to visit and start figuring out, how do you want to get there? You're going to drive, you're going to fly. You're going to drive, how many days that going to take? Where are you going to stay? And he came back and said, wow, this this little dream of mine's going to cost a couple bucks. I said, well, if that's what you want, let's get your business ready to do that. But I think that once they understand, the risk component that we develop for them, which is really where the multiple comes from, right? Uh, and we tell them, what their real number is. I like to kind of differentiate from that tax number that they probably see every quarter to, the real number, which is, an adjusted EBITDA, and tell them this is where you are today, and you know where you want to go. So you know what that gap is. Here's the profit gap in your business. Here's the value gap in your business. And here's the wealth gap that you need to close by, working these two levers of, attractiveness and transferability to get to where it is you need to be. And I found that when owners really kind of buy into that concept, they work a lot harder, and it's more meaningful for them when I tell them, okay, here we've been going through three 90-day performance cycles. You guys are still weak in this area.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to your production manager, and he's a little overwhelmed. I think he needs some more resources. So if you want this to happen, I think you're going to have to help him out. And of course, I'm grabbing the production manager and saying, dude, you've got to ask for these resources. No one knows why you're struggling. All we know is you ain't making the mark. So let's get to it and kind of bring things in together like that.